Imagine you walk into any restaurant, you scan the menu, or maybe you did so ahead of time, and you know exactly what you're going to choose to fuel your performance and fuel your physique goals. No longer is it just a reactive emotional decision. It's a planned part of your personal strategy, and that is the power that you now have in your hands. Wits and Weights community, welcome to another solo episode of the Wits and Weights podcast. In our last episode 105, Strength, Power, and Vitality for Women at Any Age with Cheryl I love, Cheryl and I discussed the art of movement, the challenges faced by women in fitness, and actions you can take to enhance vitality and build confidence, no matter your age or where you're starting from, including some self-defense strategies. Go check that out, episode 105, if you missed it. Today for episode 106, eating out while staying lean, even during fat loss. We're diving into a topic that affects everyone, myself included. We all know that sticking to your nutrition goals is not something that we do in a controlled metabolic lab. It's a battle that we fight every day in our lives. And one thing that will always exist in our lives is eating out. Whether it's a business dinner, a social gathering, you're just going out on the weekends, you're just on the road, dining out can feel like an overwhelming potential roadblock in the middle of your otherwise day-to-day routine. But what if I told you that you don't have to choose between enjoying a meal out and engineering that ideal physique that you're working so hard for? What if I said that you can develop a few helpful skills to master the art and science of eating out without missing a beat? Because after all, eating out and living your life is more the norm than the exception. And so if we think that way and kind of ditch that all or nothing and have strategies in our back pocket, we can be successful all the time, forever. Now we're talking about planning, tracking, real-time decision-making, and even a few little tricks I have at the end of the podcast that you want to stick around for that maybe you haven't heard of. I'm arming you with some strategies that are so effective that you're going to wonder how you ever dined out without them. And then by the end of this episode, you'll have a toolkit that will make eating out not just enjoyable, but also aligned with your goals. So we can definitely have your cake and eat it too, literally and metaphorically. So if you're ready to take control of your dining experiences and fuel your performance, both inside and outside the gym, let's dive into today's topic, eating out while staying lean, even during fat loss. So we know the importance of this because this is part of our everyday life and living a lifestyle that is aligned with our goals and not thinking in terms of things having to be exactly the same way every day, but rather how do we adapt to the real life situations that come into our lives. So I want to start with planning ahead. In other words, thinking about the fact that these things will occur no matter what, kind of like, I don't know, if you celebrate Christmas, it happens every year on December 25th, no matter what. And to be surprised that you didn't budget for some gifts is really on you because you knew it was coming. So we know that dining out is going to happen unless you live in a cave again. So the role of planning is to avoid these impulsive, emotionally driven choices that tend to be less nutritious or healthy or what have you, less aligned with our goals, right? That's the role of planning. There are also psychological benefits of planning ahead. Some people think the gut reaction to planning is, oh, that sounds like work. But it actually reduces your what's called decision fatigue, right? The need to make a decision in the moment. It actually gives you clarity and reduces your stress, right? It reduces the stress associated with eating out because now you have a plan at any one time and you're able to execute on it without really thinking about it. So one way to do this is to research ahead of time where you're going and what's available. So for a restaurant, this would be using a restaurant's website or their app, to look for nutritional information. If it's a chain restaurant, they're oftentimes by law or just it's a matter of course of business, they'll have these up on their website. If it's a more local restaurant, oftentimes they won't have that, but they will at least have their menu. So you can go on and look in their menu and start to browse ahead of time, think about the options that you want, things that are associated with your macro targets, with your goals, with protein-rich food, maybe lower oils and sugars and fats, kind of the hidden fats, but still things that you would definitely enjoy. And very common thing here is just think about what you would eat at home. And now how would you construct that? And now how would you construct it from a menu in a restaurant? Now, granted, you're going to a restaurant because it's a special occasion. Even if it is a once a week thing, it's special, right? And you're probably doing it to enjoy company and go out and have a different environment and so on. And you can still choose foods that are similar to what you would eat at home, even though prepared by someone else. Maybe they're better cooked than you, maybe different seasonings and so on. So we're talking things like lean meats and vegetables and things where you can see the ingredients and so on. So it's really up to you to do that, but definitely look at it ahead of time if you can. And then to go along with this, let's say you don't have access to the menu, or you don't have time to look at the menu, or whatever, or you don't even know where you're going. For example, you know somebody else is taking you there. You can set for yourself what's called a personal food plan. Okay, this is not a meal plan, where you have this is what you eat, when, and how much. But a food plan is more your guidelines. I hate to say the word rules, because rules always imply rigidity, but these are your own personal rules for yourself. So you still have 100% of the power and agency. So setting your guidelines for the food choices when you can't see the menu ahead of time, like we just talked about, prioritizing lean protein and vegetables, or deciding how many drinks you're going to enjoy and what type, or what types of desserts or appetizers. You can get as broad or specific as you want. You can get as detailed or not as you want, whatever works for you. And this could be in your head. This could be on an index card, in your pocket. This could be in your phone, in a note app, a reminder, what have you. Super flexible, okay? The other thing you can do ahead of time is log your meal ahead of time, either as a planning mechanism or because that's exactly what you're going to get. And so what I mean is a planning mechanism could be, generally what kind of restaurant you're going to and what you want to eat. So you go ahead and you pre-log it. Maybe today's Friday and tomorrow's Saturday. You're going to go out on Saturday. You go ahead and log it in your app. Now, again, I use MacroFactor. I highly recommend it. If you're going to use it, I'll include a link in the show notes with my code to get you an extra free week. My code is Wits and Weights. So you go download MacroFactor from the App Store and use my code Wits and Weights. And it's a great meal planning tool because you can log the meal, you can see what the impact is on your macros and calories, and then you have a few choices to make. You could either adjust what you're going to have at the restaurant because it's just too far off of what you want, or you can plan the rest of your day ahead of time, or even today or this week leading up to that day, so that the whole week works out the way you want it to. And one way to do this is what we call calorie banking, and that is just earlier in the day or even earlier in the week, just making sure that you are hitting maybe a little bit more tighter calorie target. So this is especially in the case if you're at maintenance or in fat loss, where you're trying not to exceed a certain number of calories each week because you're trying to induce a certain change in your body mass and your fat mass over time. If, let's say, your daily calorie goal is 1,800, you might say, okay, I'm going to aim for about 1,600 each day for 5 days leading up to this special event, and I'm going to sort of bank 1,000 calories for the week to add to that day. And that's perfectly fine, right? It's just shifting calories. You're not doing it in an obsessive way, like down to the gram, down to the calorie. It's really just being smart and planning ahead, making it all work. All right, so that's everything. Those are things you can do ahead of time. The second thing you can do is tracking. All right, so we're going to talk about how to track all this stuff because I get a lot of concerned questions, both from clients and really anybody listening who says, well, I'm going to go on a trip for the weekend. I have no idea if I could track and this and that. And it's understandable that you don't want to take your scale, your body scale or your food scale on a trip, right? We don't want to be seen as weird or that person who's doing that. If you want to do that, if it makes sense to do that, that's your choice, right? But let's say you don't. All right. So we're talking about flexible dieting here, right? The idea of fitting various foods that you enjoy into your macro and calorie goals, as well as your other goals like digestion, hunger, how it makes you feel, performance training, and so on, right? It's not just about macros. In fact, I'm going to talk about that on a future episode where we compare flexible dieting to if it fits your macros. So stay tuned for that. But the idea here is that we want to at least log the meal at the restaurant in some way that's within about 30% accurate. Believe it or not. Yeah, 30% is sufficient to get useful data when compared to not tracking at all. So that's a nice wide tolerance. In fact, it's very consistent with the idea of flexibility. and that even our logging has some flexibility built in. So if you're using Macro Factor, for example, the way I would do this is first you can search for either the exact item at that restaurant. Like if it's a chain restaurant, you can search the chain's name and then the food item, and you'll probably find it. You'll find both the like combination dishes or like named dishes they have on the menu. You might also find their side dishes and kind of construct it together. And that makes it pretty easy. And then you could just log the amount you expect to have. And I always like to add a little bit of buffer or a little bit of extra calories. So what I'll do is, let's say you go to Chipotle and you get a protein bowl, log it as like 1.2 or 1.25, just to account for the fact that they're not going to dish it the exact same way each time. And so I want to be conservative. That's during fat loss. Now, if you're trying to gain weight, maybe you just log 1 and be okay with it if it's overestimated because you're trying to get more calories anyway. So that's one way. Another way is if you're going to a restaurant where it's not in the database, you can still search for similar foods. So if it's going to be a sirloin steak, just look for sirloin steak. Now here I like to add extra fat in the form of usually just butter or extra virgin olive oil. It doesn't really matter, but just throw in a few extra tablespoons in there, probably, an extra 100 to 200 calories worth of fat just in case they're dumping that stuff in there. And of course, when you get your food, I mean, I've had dishes where it was like obvious that the oil was just oozing out of every inch of the dish, and I definitely padded that fat number when I logged it. So just be aware of those things, which is also why I like to choose things that don't have a lot of hidden ingredients, things that you can just see, steamed vegetables and dry rubbed meats and things like that. And the other thing is you could do is if the restaurant has nutritional info, but the actual dish isn't in the database, you can do a custom food based on that info or based on the whole meal or whatever, right? Like some restaurants will have, let's say a steak dish and then all the possible sides, and they'll give you all the macros and calories in a big chart. You could just quickly log that as a quick add or as a custom food in your database. So I'm making it sound a little complicated, but it really isn't once you do it. Really, it's no different than logging it at home. And the idea here is you're not going to be weighing it on a food scale. If you can weigh it on a food scale and that's part of what you're doing, of course, that gives you a little more accuracy, but I'm not suggesting to do that when you go out. And then the other thing is eyeballing your portions. So when you log it, if it isn't a standard like the protein bowl at Chipotle where it's a protein bowl and it just has everything in there, if you're logging separate ingredients of the dish, you can, first of all, overestimate a little bit, but I like to log everything in grams from the day I start tracking. And I ask my clients to do this too early on. I say, look, try to log everything in grams, food, beverages, whatever, meat, definitely don't use tablespoons and cups because those are definitely not accurate. But even pounds and ounces, I would, instead of that, use grams, so that you're thinking in grams all the time. And it's a normalized unit of measurement. So when you see on a plate, I've got some steak and potatoes and asparagus, okay, that's like 150 grams of that, 100 grams of that, 125 grams of that. Again, within 30% is fine. And that's the way you can estimate it in your head. Now, when you track it, it could be right then and there, but most people don't want to whip out their phone in front of company. It's rude, and track in front of them. So you can quickly take a photo of it, which takes like 2 seconds, and then later on, you can log it or just look at it and just know what you got and remember it and do it later on. Again, we're trying to get within 30%. For my clients, sometimes we play a guessing game where they'll take a picture, they'll send it to me later along with their guess for how they logged it with calories and macros, and then I independently will guess and we'll see where they meet, because this kind of trains you to get used to what something looks like. So we talked about planning ahead. We talked about tracking. Now, what about if you did have to make decisions in real time? Let's say you couldn't plan ahead for whatever reason, or you didn't plan ahead and you want to make decisions in real time. Remember, we are trying to reduce decision fatigue by planning ahead, but planning ahead also includes having guidelines and kind of knowing what you're going to pick no matter where you're at. That also reduces decision fatigue. So one thing to do is get used to the way things are described in menus. So looking at certain keywords like creamy, fried, glaze, right? You can kind of tell based on standard keywords, it's going to have a lot of extra fat and sugar in there. Now, again, your choice to have those things, absolutely. And if that's what you want and you're going to go enjoy it, Again, flexible dieting totally gives you that option. And it's just making sure that you track it that way. But if you're looking to get more food and a lower calorie density for what's on your plate, you definitely could avoid some of those things and get more food and not over exceed your calories, for example. And so that's where you would look for grilled, steamed, baked, right? It's pretty straightforward, but it's good to just be reminded of that because our eyes can get bigger than our stomachs when we're hungry and we're like, oh, look at this, the fried seafood dish. I mean, I love it as much as the next person, the fried everything, but it really does add up. So you just want to make sure it fits with your goals. The other thing is tell the server what you want, right? You can ask for sauces and dressings on the side. You can substitute sides, right? I know the fries are great with a steak, but maybe you want some other vegetable, right? Some grilled zucchini or whatever they have available, or maybe mashed potatoes instead of French fries, to get more food for the calories, or a side salad, for example, right? It's up to you. You're the customer. And then eating mindfully is another way to kind of stretch your calorie budget when you're eating, because you will potentially have leftovers that way, or you'll at least feel full before you get to dessert, for example, things like that. So in the moment, that also helps with the later on decision making during the meal. So you kind of think about the whole thing from appetizers and drinks to the main meal to the desserts, and just kind of your strategy for how you're going to navigate through it, but also enjoy yourself at the same time. And now if we look at the next section I want to talk about is different scenarios. I'm just going to cover 3 big ones. I'm sure you can come up with some on your own. If there's a specific scenario I didn't cover and you're still unsure of what to do, definitely always reach out to me here or in our Facebook community, Wits and Weights, free Facebook community, and just post your question like, hey, I'm going to go be doing this. You didn't really cover the details on that in the podcast. What should I do? So the first category is going to be business dinners. Very common. A lot of my clients, they're very busy, demanding lifestyles. They work, they maybe travel and so on. So a business dinner, and of course you could extrapolate this to really any dinner out, even if it's with your family or for a party. And here's where you don't want to be whipping out your phone to log a bunch of stuff, right? And appear rude. You could do the quick photo or just log it later. And then alcohol, I think it's important here to consider your alcohol strategy, where you could either opt for lower calorie options, like some hard liquors, but a little bit of it, like vodka or red wine or a light beer, something like that, or just decide that you're going to have alcohol free or a diet soda or something. Now, of course, always make sure to log it. But I know when I'm at like a business dinner, I'm going to be careful with alcohol because I want to have my faculties fully there together. Maybe with your friends or family, it's less of a concern. Now, I've been talking a lot lately to get off on a tangent about going alcohol free personally, because I had surgery about 9 weeks ago and I initially couldn't have alcohol because of that. And then I talked to an alcohol expert on, I think it was episode 93 of the show, Karolina Wjodkowolska, and kind of decided to drink alcohol-free beer. And I've been doing that ever since and loving it, So think about options like that. Another category is going to be just any social gathering, like a party, right? And one of the things I like to do here is social gatherings tend to have formats that are different than just a regular dinner. You tend to have either like a buffet or a bunch of snacks, right? Or a bunch of courses just coming out one after the other. There's alcohol flowing. There's a lot of chatting and maybe dancing and all sorts of things going on. You're just like caught up in all the revelry, which is great, right? That's what life's all about. But it's definitely easy to kind of eat a lot more than you expected and a lot of things that aren't exactly what fit your goals for your macros and other things. So one nice thing I like to do is to pre-eat or preload protein earlier in the day for a couple reasons. One, it can curb hunger, if you have protein. And then 2, these gatherings are often full of foods that have very little to no protein. Protein tends to be expensive, right? And harder to prepare for some of these things. It's much easier for them to make, fried dishes, appetizers, hors d'oeuvres, those kinds of things. You might see a cheese and meat plate there or something like that. but you're generally not going to have like big things of like steak and chicken and pork. You might. I mean, that's awesome if you do, but just assume you're not and preload with protein earlier in the day. And so what you can do is for breakfast and lunch, for example, have a decent amount of your protein for the day in those meals, along with some vegetables to fill you up, but to keep the calories low. The other strategy at these gatherings, if it's like a buffet style or, just tables of stuff, is apply the art of planning, or this art and science of planning in the moment, meaning rather than just jumping right in, take your time, scan everything, right? Just look at everything. Don't get overwhelmed. Just start from the left to right, go and look at everything available. And then take your food guidelines that you developed earlier and go ahead and fill your plate with the things that are important to you. And I mean fill it, because I don't want you to leave room for other things and say, well, I've got room on my plate, so I might as well go get the brownie over here and, the cookies over here and so on. Scan everything and then fill like half your plate with vegetables, right? Maybe a quarter with protein and then and then the other quarter with carbs, something like that, right? Or you can start with the protein, again, protein, vegetables, and then a little bit of carbs, and do that and really fill it up with the things that you enjoy. I'd rather you have like a decent amount of those things to fill you up that also serve your goals, and then you're not so hungry for the other stuff, but you still ate a decent amount, okay? So those are some basic strategies for social gatherings. And then travel, I mean, I did a whole episode on travel quite a while back. It's 20-something, I think, a long time ago, about how to handle that. The very basics I'm going to touch on here is packing things for your trip, like your protein powder, protein bars, meat sticks or jerky, your shake bottle, like just to have an easy protein option if there's just nothing there, right? You could always just have a whey protein shake, a scoop or two, and top off your protein and get like 30, 40 grams of protein right there. Very easy. Or again, meat sticks. I like the First Form meat sticks and the protein bars as well. Make sure it's the kind of protein bars that won't melt, right? Because some of them have like a chocolate coating, and those can get all nasty and sticky if it's hot, or even in the plane. You never know if you're flying, well, the temperature changes. So pick something that's more hardy than that. And then you can, the other thing I like is if you're staying at a hotel, if there's 1 or 2 meals a day that you can make somewhat of a just routine, kind of like you're at home, where you can just cook them yourself. That's a nice way to blunt the effects of the other part of the day, which is probably going out or doing these big parties or what have you. So there's a lot more tips I have in the last episode on this. Again, I don't have the number off the top of my head, and I want to continue getting through today's episode. But if I can remember to do that, I will put that in the show notes for you. All right, the last thing are just a few little creative hacks that come to mind. I'm sure you can come up with more, but I'm going to give you 3 today just to keep it simple. The first one is called the half plate trick. And all this is when you first order your food at the restaurant, immediately ask for a to-go box. Right? You might have heard this technique before, but ask for a to-go box and pack half the food in the to-go box. So I don't know, let's say you're going to Olive Garden, and you've been convinced to go to Olive Garden, and pretty much everything they have there is pasta dishes. Now, I'm sure there's some leaner options you can get if you want, but hey, I like chicken Alfredo as much as the next person, and maybe that's what I'm going to order, knowing that it's probably, a 2,000 calorie dish. Probably. I don't know, all that fatty cream and all the pasta, but it's delicious. So I'm going to ask for a box. I'm going to throw half of it in the box, and now my plate is still got a decent amount of, food mass in there. And I'm going to act like, hey, I'm just eating the whole thing today. I'm just going for it and I'm eating the whole thing, but really it's only half of what you ordered, right? You could do that with the bread even. You could just put, like, if you were going to have a second breadstick, put that breadstick in the to-go box and so on. That's one trick. The second trick is just the water trick, right? Drinking a full glass of water before your meal arrives. Very simple thing, but we get caught up in our conversations, and sometimes your glass just sits there the whole time, right? And it's like pretty much full. Go ahead and gulp down that water right away so that it fills up your stomach a little bit, reduces the satiety signal or increases the satiety signal, and maybe you will not feel like just devouring everything that's put in front of you or going for the appetizers and so on. And then the third trick is just the mindfulness trick of putting your fork down between bites. And I like this trick because it doesn't require all the I hate to say it, like woo mindfulness stuff that we all struggle with. And I personally like have tried all the mindfulness things of, listening to my food as I chew it, turning everything off, this and that. But look, you're out at a restaurant with other people and you're talking, you're distracted. So you can't do that. But guess what? You can just put the fork down after a bite and then pick it back up. Just like when you cut meat, instead of cutting with the right and then putting it in your mouth with your left, do it like, what do they call it? American style, where I think that's what it's called, where you cut it, put the knife down on the plate, swap the fork to the other hand, and then eat the bite. It just adds a little more time and causes you to eat more mindfully. What does this do? It allows you time to digest, to enjoy and stretch the food out, and then your body sort of catches up, despite all the distracting things going on and conversations and fun that you're having, so that perhaps you aren't tempted, let's say, to eat way more than you otherwise planned. All right, so those are the key strategies. I'm sure there are many more. I know, in fact, there are many more that I've shared with clients over the time that I've been coaching. But I wanted to give you some basic hard hitters that are really easy to implement that can have a big impact on your success when you eat out. And I definitely encourage you to take one or two of these and apply it to your next experience. You don't have to do the whole thing. Just go back, look at the timestamps, jump to the thing that you want to review, and apply it in your real life. This weekend, for example, this episode comes out on a Tuesday, so you've got a few days to plan. You could do the calorie banking, or you can look at the menu, right? There's all these strategies. So we're talking about planning, being flexible, reducing decision fatigue, using tricks to kind of trick your mind into being more mindful when you're eating. And we talked about different scenarios. And the key takeaways are preparation, personalizing it to you, and being mindful. So now imagine you walk into any restaurant, you scan the menu, or maybe you did so ahead of time, and you know exactly what you're going to choose to fuel your performance and fuel your physique goals. No longer is it just a reactive emotional decision. It's a planned part of your personal strategy, and that is the power that you now have in your hands. And I can't wait to hear how you implement them, so I want you to go out there, dine smartly, and share your experiences by reaching out to me. Again, you can reach me in a whole bunch of places. Instagram at Wits and Weights is one. Another is in the Wits and Weights Facebook community. All these links are always in my show notes whenever you need to find them. And again, these are the kinds of strategies I help clients with every day. Now, they're going to be much more highly tailored for the individual. If a client has a specific thing that is tripping them up, I'm going to attack that with them. We're going to creatively come up with a solution, but the principles are the same. Planning ahead, making it work for you, being mindful. So the last thing I want to mention, I don't think I've mentioned this on the podcast, but if I haven't, I'm remiss on, you're missing out and I'm remiss on not having done it. But every week I send at least 3 emails a week, sometimes 4 or 5, to my email list with these kinds of strategies. And they're things that you may not find on the podcast, right? They're things that come to my mind sometimes that morning. And I have an epiphany or something that I recently helped a client with that's very specific and is going to be helpful, or just reminding you of the general principles of progressive overload, flexible dieting, intuitive eating, talking about forms of training, all these things that you're not going to necessarily find on the podcast. And if you want those, it's easy to get on my list. You just go to witsandweights.com/email. That's it. witsandweights.com/email, or again, you can click the link in the show notes that says get Philip's emails here. Okay, so again, you can go to witsandweights.com/email or click the link in the show notes that says get Philip's emails here. And in our next episode 107, the secrets of zero injury running while optimizing body composition with Louise Valentine. So Louise is going to return to the show. She was one of my earliest interview guests. She was, in fact, the first interview guest that I didn't know prior to her coming on my show. And she's going to share some exciting strategies and considerations for female endurance athletes. So I usually don't work with endurance athletes myself, and I'm happy to have you guys learn about what Louise can do for endurance athletes who also care about body composition, who want to be competitive, right? Who want endurance to be kind of their primary mode of training. Again, here on this show, our primary mode of training is usually strength training, resistance training. And Louise talks to women particularly women 35 and over who love to run and maybe juggling multiple goals to lose weight and lean out while still enjoying their sport. So if you're interested in both running and achieving your physique goals, check out our next episode 107. To get notified of those new episodes and help others find the show, just follow or subscribe in your favorite podcast app. Do it right now. I want you to pause and make sure you've clicked the little toggle to follow or subscribe, whatever it says in your app right now, because otherwise you just will miss out on the next episode. And this is also one of the best ways you can support the show, because the more people that are subscribers or followers, the higher it gets ranked so people can find it. And again, you won't have to manually download individual episodes. So just click follow or subscribe in your app, please. That's very helpful. As always, stay strong, and I'll talk to you next time here on the Wits and Weights podcast.